Hi, everybody. This is Dan Klingon-Smith, author of the Creating G.I. Joe, Real American Hero book series, and also host to this podcast, The Toy Files. With me tonight, I have Mr. Greg Berndtson, who is the Design Director Plus at Hasbro and of Boys Toys, and worked on G.I. Joe. And primarily tonight, what we're going to focus on is learning a little bit about Greg and his past, as well as learn about his time on G.I. Joe specifically. We may dabble into some other areas that he worked on, and maybe we'll touch upon that in a future podcast. But let me go ahead and bring him on. Greg, how's it going?
Hi, Dan. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Appreciate you coming on and joining everybody and sharing out about your experiences. As I just mentioned, everybody, primarily we're going to learn a little bit about your history, about you, and just your past, and then lead into some of the questions about your time at Hasbro, and then some specific questions with G.I. Joe and stuff like that. So to get started, first question I had was, how early on in life were you interested in art or industrial design, and what did you study in college?
Well, I guess early on would have been in elementary school. I was always one to draw whatever interested me, whether it was dinosaurs or trying to copy editorial cartoons from the newspaper. Just pencil, using whatever media was handy to try and mimic what somebody else had already done. So that kind of led to just into the art field. And by the time I got to high school, I did pretty well in the art courses that they had there, and led me into college where I majored in graphic design. So this would be the stuff that would appear on a printed page.
Okay.
So when I graduated college, I had a BFA in graphic design, and ultimately landed a job as an in-house artist for a printing company, and I hated it. So, and it didn't pay well. So I basically was trying to juggle a couple of part-time jobs while still trying to find work in an art-related field. And what happened was, during that period of time, one of the things that I have no recollection of ever doing was signing with my college placement office. And at that time, they then contacted me saying, well, we have this opportunity at Hasbro. Would you be interested in, putting your resume in for the job? And I said, well, of course. So after a 3-month process going through 3 interviews, I believe it was, uh, for whatever reason, they decided to hire me. And the project that I was assigned to was to work on a building block system that was supposed to um, compete with Lego at that time. And it was a product called Tente, which was licensed by Hasbro from a company in Spain. And my job at that time was to create product for the American market using these bricks, and eventually design new bricks to try and flesh out that system. And at that time, it just lasted 2 years before Lego buried Hasbro because their quality was superior. They could put more bricks in a box than what Hasbro could afford to do for a similar price point. And after those 2 years, they then decided, well, maybe we shouldn't be in this business. And I got transferred into the general design pool. From there, I could do preschool toys, action games, whatever they needed, I was assigned to in categories. And so I worked on Snoopy parking garage for their die-cast toy line, and I came up with a couple of concepts that never really went anywhere, but that was the job until 1980, when there was the renewed interest to reintroduce G.I. Joe. And so at that time, it was myself and um, people like Todd Wise and Wayne Luther and Fred Edens and Rich Rossi of the world back at who were there at the time. Paul Katowski was also in the group at that time, and Jim Totley was the sculptor, and uh, Roger Avery,
Mhm.
and those were the people that were the nucleus that created the look for GI Joe, the 3 3/4 inch figure, at
Mhm.
its very earliest. My job was mostly doing the accessories, things like the backpacks, the weapons, small things like the jump pack, those kinds of things for the first year.
Mhm. And you know, so when you got into that role, well, what year did you start at Hasbro?
I started at Hasbro in November of 1977.
Okay. Okay.
And like I said, the first 2 years were working on Tente.
Mhm.
Then 78, 79 primarily was doing just in-house toy design on other categories. Like I said, preschool, um, games, um, action games. Well, I remember working on a number of different concepts that, like I said, didn't really go anywhere, but that was our job at the time to see, come up with stuff and see what they liked and what they didn't and what they thought would sell.
Mhm. With coming into that role, coming from where you were, was there any challenges like having to, create toys at that point? Especially like coming in the, or I mean, coming from like a graphic design type of role, um, doing that type of stuff to having to create like, building blocks essentially. Was there any challenges with that, or did it come
No,
naturally?
actually, it was because, I couldn't think of any better job than coming up with toys, playing with toys, doing stuff like that. To me, it kind of felt sort of natural that because you do what you enjoyed playing with pretty much,
Mhm.
like, oh boy, if I could make this, then I can do this with it, that kind of thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
So to switch from, say, a graphic background into a product type background, I did not have an issue with that. Um, I won't say it was seamless, but it was sort of easy for me. And because it also allowed me great flexibility to use the various tools and equipment that they had there. I always was able to, know my way around shop tools and whatnot. Um, but having them pay me to do this was great.
Mhm. Now you mentioned something, kind of see your eyes lit up as far as toys. Who doesn't want to work on that? So going back to your childhood, what were some of your favorite toys as a child, and how did they influence any decisions you made working on the different toy brands that you did?
Well, I was always a big model builder, always liked to do scale models and whatnot, whether it was ship, planes, or tanks, cars, didn't matter. But even before that would be toys like I used to have a Marx Cape Canaveral space set, which was, you take it in the backyard and you can pretend that you were launching rockets from Cape Canaveral, or the toy called Mr. Machine. I had erector sets that you could, back in the day, you'd use nuts and bolts and girders and all of that. Kenner girder and panel set was another one that you could build skyscrapers and basically make like the small city that I would then run my American Flyer train through. So all that kind of stuff is what I'd like to do.
And how did that influence you, you think, in your role as far as jumping in the industry itself?
Um, the challenge wasn't so much, like I said earlier, to design stuff that you really wanted to play with, but it was learning about the nuts and bolts as to how to make it profitable, how to make something do something in as few pieces as possible, but yet do it the way you wanted it to do. So and you also learn what could be molded and what couldn't be, or what you had to do to make it moldable, and how pieces went together. That was more the challenging part. So that coming in at a ground level like that was also an education. In fact, we always used to call it the University of Hasbro.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I've heard that term a lot. So,
Yeah,
and coming into that environment, like you said, there's so many things you need to be aware of, especially when you're working with tooling and pulling it, and you know what I mean, all the thresholds that you got to be aware of, right? So,
sure,
you know,
sure. Um,
you
today, sounding like a real old timer, everything's done with through a keyboard, but back
mhm,
then it was hands on, and there was that aesthetic feel that you could only get by the actual sensation of how something feels, that a curve or or a shape or something like that, is what made it satisfying.
mhm, mhm. I know you're like many others, Kunitz and Frank Coronius, like same thing. They like working with their hands as far as the item
Exactly,
itself. So,
exactly.
as far as the different types of positions you held at Hasbro in your tenure, what were some of the different positions? What were your responsibilities? Was there a particular position that you enjoyed over another? And, what challenges did you face maybe in each different position?
Well, initially, like I said, being put into the general design pool,
Mhm.
it was just the day to day of what the company asking, "What have you done for me today?" Because your job was to come up with stuff and make things happen, whether you were assigned a product or a project, and or coming up with something on your own. Um, from there, moved to a senior designer level, and that's once experience was acquired, and you then knew what was going on. You could assume more responsibility by not only coming up with the product, but doing more of the follow through with the interaction with engineering and the art department and marketing. Those responsibilities and interactions also grew to become a design director, where obviously now you're managing multiple projects done by other people. And at that position, I always felt more like a ringmaster in a circus, because you've got three rings going on, and there's different things in each ring at different stages, and to guide each of those items through its various processes, you did feel like you were juggling stuff. So you know, they're looking over here, but in the meantime, you also have to do this function over there, so that when their gaze then goes over there, you can then take it and move that along and do something else over here. It sounds kind of convoluted, but like I said, you're juggling and managing a number of different items at different stages,
Mhm.
and trying to get each of them through so that at the end of the day, they're on a toy shelf in some store.
Mhm. And different personalities.
And different personalities, right.
Juggling a
And
lot of different personalities.
not only within the design group, but, everybody had their own skills and, points of view, whether it was in engineering or marketing.
Mhm, mhm,
And then on top of that, you had the safety and reliability people who had their own criteria and requirements, and, it was just it made it an interesting time to, really be in the industry doing this kind of thing.
mhm,
It's like, I always equated it now, because I'm not a trained industrial designer.
mhm,
uh, I'm kinda like what's known as a backdoor designer. I didn't go to college for industrial design, but yet, I equated what we did at Hasbro as like battlefield surgery. We only get one time to do it right, and that time was usually pretty limited. So we became pretty good at doing just that.
mhm,
Whereas in a traditional design house, they could take months and months to fidget and noodle and massage, and then to say, well, no, we can't do it this way, let's start over. We didn't have that luxury.
Hmm.
We had a certain window to get things done, and the only guideposts that we had was marketing coming to us saying, "Oh, we need 3 items at the 9.99 price point. We need 4 new accessory packs that at this price point. We're also looking for a 15.99 item." And okay, that's basically sort of like the roadmap, but it doesn't necessarily meant it was carved in stone that each one of those things. And if some other great idea came up,
Hmm.
marketing was flexible enough to realize that and would change their plan accordingly
Hmm.
if they liked the item.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And you had to be flexible with those different types of things.
And that's the big case in point would have been the USS Flagg.
Hmm.
I mean, there was no requirement or anything on anybody's marketing sheet to say, "Hey, we need $100 item." In 1985, that was just off the wall bonkers. But yet at the time, I thought, gee, wouldn't it be great if there was some GI Joe toy that everything that's currently in the lineup could interact with, both good guy and bad guy? So I thought, well, what about an aircraft carrier? You could always say it's offshore and it's launching, these things. And we had the Tomcat at the Sky Striker at that time that, needed a place to be. So I thought, well, okay, let's design an aircraft carrier that this thing could land on. Plus, we had the Dragonfly helicopter, and Cobra had the
The rat.
Warthog at that time. Yeah, the Rattler, and so you could set up conflict that way.
Hmm.
And like I said, there was no marketing request for it. And in fact, the first time it was presented, the presentation, the management level presentation room, after I had made the initial pitch, just fell silent. And somebody finally piped up and said, "Well, this is a prop for Toy Fair, right?" And I said, "No, I'm proposing this as an actual toy." And I will never forget when Stephen Hasenfeld stood up from his chair, leaned against the wall, and then peppered a couple of questions at me saying, um, "Would this fit under a bed?" And I said, "Absolutely." And he said, "Well, can that superstructure be removed?" And at the time, hadn't planned for that to happen, but I knew enough at the time to say, "Yes, sir, absolutely, sir." The only requirement was that the original model was 10 feet long, and he wanted it a little shorter so that it could fit under a bed. So
Hmm.
we had to make a little change here and there in order to make that happen.
That's crazy. I mean, it's big enough as it is, but now to add 3 more feet to it, I
Yeah,
mean, it's nuts that it would have been potentially that big. But so
but
you're to blame.
that goes to show that, like I said, marketing didn't have a request, and
Mhm.
engineering certainly didn't know how to go about doing it at that time. But it was the adaptability of the group that saw the potential. And I do credit Stephen Hasenfeld, who was really a toy guy that knew the potential and
Mhm.
and stood behind it.
So you're to blame for all the big vehicles we got after that, right?
um, well, then it became a matter that marketing did put in following years,
Yeah.
the aspirational toy item, and they just happened to be the big ticket items, whether it was the Terradrome or the Space Shuttle Complex, all of that followed on. Yes.
Exactly. No, I mean, yeah, I think when people think GI Joe, I mean, the flag is definitely one of those things that it's high up there. It's the grail for many as far as having that. Because as a kid, I mean, I didn't have one as a kid. I'll be the first to admit. And the kid down the street had it. A lot of jealousy there, and I was like, well, how am I gonna do this? And my parents just never got it. So, as an adult, I did. Noah had his, or has his, I should say, still. But yeah, it's a staple. Staple piece for many people's collections. So something I think you should be proud of as far as knowing that so many people love that playset. So,
That part of it makes it very satisfying for me. I
mhm.
mean, it's a nice feeling when you could walk down the toy aisle in the store and say, I did that, but you say it to yourself, but you do feel good seeing something that you shepherded and or created, and say, yeah, I did that.
Especially when it's 7 feet long, right?
When
Um,
it's for sure.
uh, um, besides GI Joe, what other brands did you did you work on or manage?
One of the other action figure lines that I had a lot of fun doing was Cops and Crooks.
Hmm.
Fighting crime in a future time. I enjoyed that one. The figures were larger, you could do more with it, and I was working with Bart Sears, who was an immense talent in creating a look. Guy Cassidy doing vehicles, for example. Just it just was a fun line to work on. I really feel bad that it never made it to the third year because we had some great ideas that for the figures, good guys and bad guys, that that never saw the light of day.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I've seen. I'll have to check my files, but I may have seen some images. Did it get far enough to where like presentation art existed, or
There was some presentation art on the third year, yes.
okay? I'll have to see if I
Um,
can find some of it. Do you remember any of the names off chance, or working names, or?
uh, there was one character that I remember because it was an idea that I had for a bad guy, and it was the ventriloquist, and he
Okay.
would hold a dummy, and the dummy looked like uh, Boom Boom, the machine, the hitman, and he had the machine gun in his as the dummy would, but the ventriloquist didn't do the actual firing or the action of the toy. It was the dummy that did it.
Hmm.
But, that was one that stands out in my mind for the 3rd year, and, Bart came up with a real good look for him.
Yeah, Bart's artwork is just amazing. I know he did a few Joe pieces. I know he created only like two figures really, which is Skidmark and Stiletto Driver, or Star Viper, right? And but for presentation art, he did a pretty decent amount, like Charbroil and I think what Blizzard and a few others. But yeah, I've always loved Bart's designs and the whole cops line. I know Pennington worked on it with him a little bit as well, and then
Yeah.
you
Those
know,
boys would work late nights cranking out that stuff.
yeah,
I know
yeah,
they did.
they've told me a few stories
I'm sure. I'm sure.
working on that, but
I
um,
I mean, I also did, this little line called Army Ants,
okay.
and, they were 2 basically ants with a glow in the dark tail. One army had this colored tail, and the other army had, like, green colored glow in the dark tails, and they had their leaders, and it was all played on the name of Ant in their names, General McAnther and General
Mhm.
Pat Ant, that kind of thing was going on. So you had flamethrowers and riflemen and mortar ants and all. It was just a corny kind of thing, but it was fun to do, and it was
Mhm.
done real quick. We turned it around in under like 6 months to get it from start to finish,
And that came out,
and
right? That
then
came to fruition,
it was
right? That
that
was
did come
released,
to
right?
fruition.
Okay, I thought so. Okay.
There were other concepts that was one that had it was almost like plastic origami, but it would fold up so that it could fit in a pocket of your shirt.
Okay.
And when you took it out, you would open it up, and the case would actually be the base, whether it was like a racetrack or whatever. And it had a launcher in it, for example, that the vehicle that was in it could then fold up into a three-dimensional vehicle, whether it was a plane or a car or a helicopter or something like that. And the name escapes me, and I have a sample of it somewhere. But
Okay.
that was a concept that I believe got into the tool making stage. They actually had the molds made, And then at the very last minute, Hasbro decided not to do it. It was
Mm,
decided at Toy Fair. And I think what happened is that they ultimately sold off the tooling to another company, and they made it.
mm. So you mentioned, you started working on Joe in 1980. Yeah, how did you get involved in GI Joe, and how excited were you to be part of it? And what was your vision for the brand back then?
Um, how I was excited about it because to me, I was doing military miniatures. Ron Rudat, Kirk Bazigian, and I were doing, like I said, military miniatures. I worked in 135th. I did armor, tanks, and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was from a kit or scratch built. And we would go to shows and enter into contests and whatnot. That it just seemed like a good fit for me. Also, kind of like being involved in well, having a hobby of reading a lot of history and whatnot. It just seemed like it was a good fit, and so I kind of stuck my foot in the door and crammed my way into working on the category, and just kind of grew from there.
Mm-hmm. And many have shared with me about your passion towards GI Joe over the years, and many have said that you're probably one of the most passionate people. I just want to share that with you as far as the brand itself, and you know what you put into it. So I just wanted to share that information with
I
you.
appreciate that. Thank you, Dan.
Um, so there can sometimes be a lot of obstacles involved with being a creative professional. What were some of your biggest challenges, and how did you overcome them?
um, the biggest challenge was trying to convey a vision that you had to others, and you sometimes had to grow thick skin because a lot of times there were comments that people would react negatively,
Mm-hmm.
especially in presentation, that yeah, it could really bother you if you let it. And in the early days, that was something you had to learn to do. You had to grow thick skin and just say, okay, this is their viewpoint, but you then come to the realization that, well, okay, I see their point. Maybe if I change something here or incorporate that there, it might be better.
Mm-hmm. And in
Not
your
an
role,
easy thing to do, by the way, when you're that passionate about something.
no, no, I know, and I learned something, with my college days, with photography, you had to kind of grow thick skin too, because people are, tearing apart a little bit of your artwork or your design, your photographs, and you're like, you had to learn like, okay, they know what they're talking about if it's the instructor or whatever, and then if it's your classmates or whatever, you had to value their opinion because not you didn't have to change it if you didn't want, but you could always value it and be open minded to their opinions and stuff like
Yes.
that. And it's hard when it's something that you created, of course, which you were given a hard role. I know people have shared. You were kind of the one having to sometimes do the presentation for your team, and so.
Initially, that was so. I was basically the face up there that would present, and I would try to make sure I got all the features and all the points that the designer wanted to get through.
Hmm.
Eventually, as the brand matured, um, the designers themselves started to take more of a role in presentation, and that people like the Dave Kunitz and Guy Cassidays of the world, Bill Young, um, Frank Coronius, would then become the face of their creation.
That's cool.
And then I would be basically a support system for them.
Hmm. Was that a decision you made, or is that just kind of naturally how it went?
I just felt that it was a combination of both.
Hmm.
I think that they should have gotten credit. I always tried to give credit where it was due, and let them stand front and center. And you can be on the front line defense when, when the arrows started flying. um, yeah, I'll be right behind you.
Exactly, exactly. You just take the first hit. I'll support you behind it. So,
Yeah.
But
exactly.
no, I mean it's good because it probably, many of them have grown in their careers as well, and I think that probably helped.
And
You
you
know,
could see that with like
shape-
Dave Kunitz
yeah,
today.
hmm yeah, with all his experience and where
Right,
he moved into. So for sure.
right.
Um, every designer has their own way of working through each project. Could you spread some or shed some light on how your personal design process was from start to finish? Did you do sketches? Did you do kit bashing? And how many versions did you do, through until the final product was decided upon? So some of the stuff that you worked on, like some of the
Well,
vehicles primarily.
um, there it could happen in any manner. I mean, I've done it where I did a series of just line drawings, Tomahawk being an
Mm-hmm.
example. There must be like 20 line drawings of different ideations,
Mm-hmm.
different ideas of what's going to go where and a shape or a look or whatnot. And to just wait a minute, I have a thought. Let me get some plastic bits here and there, and I just need a couple of kits and see if we can smash something together and make it work. Um, so it can go in any which way, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Or it might be a mechanism. I have an idea for a mechanism. I never did get the chance, but I had an idea for a very simple mechanism using what they called living hinges at that time for an eight-wheeled armored car, where when you activated a lever, all the wheels would turn, so you could basically turn on a dime, and the front four wheels on the vehicle could turn one way, and the back wheels would turn the other way, so that you could really do tight turns that way. And
Mm-hmm.
um, but it was an idea for a mechanism. I did one prototype, but I never got the chance to create a vehicle around it. So it can
Mm-hmm.
happen in any direction.
Mm-hmm. And I think I may have featured that or something, a vehicle that was going to have that type of feature, if I recall in the book. So I'll have
Right.
to check.
And,
But
and Lord knows you've got some of my failures with of vehicles that I did
hey,
renderings for, but you look at it and you say, what in the heck was I thinking?
well, there's some great ones in there too. I mean, don't get the transport vehicle like the Goliath, and I think the first one was just called the armored transport vehicle. Where you could transport the mauler and stuff like that.
Right.
Um, so there's some good ones in there. There's some good ones in there. Do you? So you mentioned the Tomahawk as something that you kind of had ideations and drawings. What comes to mind, like when you first think kit bashing? What vehicle that you can remember? Just yep, I started that off just getting some plastic and building.
Just to get plastic and building would probably be the Wolverine.
Okay.
I just felt at that time that wouldn't it be neat to have some kind of an armored vehicle that had a bank of missiles that could fire, shoot out, even though at that time we did not have launching mechanisms. But just the fact that you had this thing with, I guess it had what, eight, 10 missiles on it, something like that.
I think eight on
Uh,
each. Yeah.
and it was kind of loosely based on a German martyr at the time. That the wedge shaped look, but that was something that I just kind of smashed together with bits of plastic to try and get the concept across.
Now, did you help with choosing Cover Girl to be the driver, or how did
No,
that
I did, at that no, I did not at that time.
come? Okay.
That was a marketing decision, I believe, that they
Okay.
wanted to incorporate women, more female characters in the line.
And that's you think Kirk a little bit because Courtney is the character's name, so that's his daughter's name. So,
Yeah, yeah, I'm
um,
sure Cook had the influence on that.
when it comes to GI Joe, what do you view as your biggest success and your biggest failure? And what vehicles were the most difficult to design for the brand?
Well, they all have their um, they all have their place. I
Hmm.
like them all. Let me say. So it's kind of like picking your favorite child.
Yeah.
But like you had mentioned earlier, I guess the fact that the flag was groundbreaking at that time. Um, So for me, that holds a lot of satisfaction. Um, Things like the space shuttle complex. I mean, I don't know if your viewers know the history of the creation for that item, but the fact that it was probably 6 to 8 weeks of my life working till 10 o'clock at night, but with four or five other people
Mm-hmm.
trying to create this thing in an impossibly short amount of time and getting it done. That's also very rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the shuttle complex. One of the failures was a mechanism that I had worked on where, like the Wolverine had the banks of missiles, but I came up with an idea and worked with Paul Katowski to actually come up with a device that could fire banks of missiles at a time. And there were probably 16 or 20 missiles in the bank.
Oh
And
wow.
it was motorized so that all you had to do was push a button and these things would shoot out. The failure was that they didn't travel very far, for one thing. And then it was all of a sudden being told that nobody would want this because once they're fired, you now have to go and pick all these things up and put them back in there. And who wants to do that for 20 missiles at a time?
That's true. Especially they're all over the floor, right? Scattered.
Exactly. They became vacuum cleaner food.
There you
But
go.
but um, it never went anywhere, and that was kind of disappointing because these are things that you didn't realize at the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, is that in the 80s or is that more after,
This
when
was
spring
getting
loaded?
towards the 1990,
Okay.
91 time frame.
So when spring loaded weapons were included. So when you guys
Yes,
could actually
yes,
uh,
that's when we could actually shoot them.
shoot
Yes,
stuff. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. How important is collaboration in design and to have a diverse group of people working on the brand who thought differently and could express their opinions and ideas and can share any stories, on working on a specific design or project where it really was a collaboration in that sense?
I could say it in one word: indispensable.
Mhm.
I mean, I always encouraged people, and whether it was to come to my office or for me to go to theirs, but just to lean against the door and say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And if you had something to show, you could then, let them see it, handle it, do play with it, do whatever, or vice versa. They could come and talk about what they were working on. And like you had mentioned, the different viewpoints allowed you to see things that you wouldn't or have ordinarily noticed, but because they come from a different point of view, you could incorporate, make sense. You could accept it or say, well, maybe I can modify that and do this.
Hmm. Hmm. Keeping an open mind, right? And
Well,
that could,
that's the idea. But the
yeah,
key thing is to have that interaction. You
yeah,
can't work in a vacuum.
yeah.
Um, you really do. Designers, in my opinion, always want to be amongst other designers to bounce ideas from.
Hmm. Hmm. And again, collaboration also, I think, um, goes out to like engineering and marketing and stuff like that, different departments as well. Having.
Exactly. I mean, we were very fortunate to have people like Vinny DeLeva and Kirk Bazigian, who were really toy guys
Hmm.
that could add and put their slant and what they considered fun into the mix as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for sure, especially like Vinny's background. It's kind of how he got the job in the first place, right? Toy related. So,
Oh
uh,
yeah,
it's definitely, and it was a team environment and it was a team effort, really, to get it all
and we
set.
all liked one another.
Yeah, still do, I hope. So I'm assuming that GI Joe. I'm assuming that the GI Joe team had disagreements at times. Is there any? Do you recall a specific event or a product where that occurred, and you know you guys had to come together to make sure that the product was a success?
There was one instance where the company decided to make us more efficient, to have us just do drawings and do a series of drawings that would then get passed on to a three-dimensional design group that they were formulating, and
Mm-hmm.
they would do the actual hands-on. The thinking at the time was that if we just did the drawings, or the team would do the drawings, then they pass that on. They could create other product by just doing drawings, so they could get more output from us.
From the
Well,
designers.
the designers at the time really did not accept or were receptive to that, because they wanted to build. They wanted to put their own detail on it. They knew what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it. So they
Mm-hmm.
felt that they were losing control of that product. And that was a tough sell to get used to them just creating the drawings, to have people like Alan Ferrara, for example,
Mm-hmm.
involved in doing it.
Bill Cook and the 3D Mech Tech group,
The
essentially.
3D Mech Tech group, exactly.
Yeah, and I know some have expressed that, and that's one thing Alan talked about recently in our interview was, he enjoyed working with you guys, and he said he tried to bring you guys in as much as possible because he knew it was your project and he knew how important it was, and to make sure that he was getting your guys' input, and he said people were open to suggestions. If he was like, hey, what about adding some flair here or adding this to that, so he was very respectful, you could tell, towards the designers who created it, and trying to produce
Yeah.
something that they appreciated. So
Yeah, we knew that, it was going, and, good pair of hands to handle that kind of stuff. But still, it felt like you were giving up something.
still your baby that you're giving
Yeah.
up control.
Yeah.
Yeah. Understand that totally. What do you find personally compelling about design research, and what type of research did you do to create a vehicle or a figure? And in your brain, like, did you ever create backstories with your creations to assist you in the process?
It, sometimes it's the best answer I could give. I mean, pe- things like the Frag Viper, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those characters that we knew Cobra needed a hand grenade guy, and I had just gone to Highlight, and never won a round, lost everything. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be neat if a Cobra guy had something on the end of his hand, like a Highlight guy, to throw the hand grenade as far as he could? So that's how that look came out. So I challenged, I guess it was Mark at that time,
Yeah.
to come
Yeah.
up with a look for the character. And once that was decided upon, it then went to Dave Dorman to do the illustration. And that's what sold it.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to think. Tiger Force was one where we always looked at the latest publications, whether it was Jane's or International Defense and whatnot. And I happened to see an article in International Defense Review. It was a quarterly periodical that the air forces of the world would, NATO air forces, I should say, would have this competition, and they called it a tiger meet. And the nation would then send their best pilot, pretty much, and then decorate the airplane in kind of like a tiger theme
Mm-hmm.
motif. And I thought to myself, well, we have airplanes in GI Joe, why can't they participate? So I painted up the Sky Striker
Okay.
and presented that as basically a one of. But during management presentation, they decided, hey, this is a great look. It's a great way to reuse tooling, and we can sell a ton of these. Can you add more vehicles? We don't care if they fly or not.
Mm-hmm.
So out of that came Tiger Force.
Okay.
Of course, after that, Cobra had to have something, so
Of
then
course.
became Python Patrol. And so their motif was more like a snakeskin kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Dave Kunitz's idea on how to do that, using a mesh and a netting to
Mm-hmm.
get that snaky effect. And yeah, so it all depends whether it was something you read or something that you remember as a kid or just
Well,
whatever.
you traveled around too. I mean, you went to different
We would go to
museums and
Yeah, we would attend AUSA, which is the International Army Show in Washington, D.C. I was fortunate enough to go with Rich Rossi to the Farnborough Air Show in England, where this was in 1988 was the first year that the Russians were demonstrating their MiG-29, which was, kind of secretive to the West. Basically, they didn't know much about it. But one of the funny stories that I have is that when I was there, the Russians would do their flying demonstration with the MiG-29, and in another part of the showgrounds, the Italian company Automolara was showing off their latest anti-aircraft self-propelled gun. And while the Russians were doing their acrobatics and whatnot, the Italian the Italians had their cannons trained on this airplane. It was flying around doing its movement, and
making sure it works.
I was standing right next to the thing as they had the hatches open and whatnot, and I was watching them inside on their screens and whatnot, doing what they were doing, while this plane was flying around in the sky. It
That's
was pretty awesome.
that's funny. And I think I have a picture of you in a tank. I'm not sure where that was taken, but
That was probably Camp Edwards.
okay.
Yeah, we did a field trip to Camp Edwards, which was an Army Reserve base out on Cape Cod,
Hmm.
and we were yeah, we got to ride and drive tanks and bridge
So cool.
layers and engineer vehicles. It was pretty cool.
How
Uh,
often did you guys do those like little trips? I guess you could say.
we would try and do them at least once a year, sometimes more than that. I know Ron Rudat arranged for us to go to the Natick
Uh huh.
labs in
Yep. Yep.
Framingham. That's where they developed the equipment, helmets, Kevlar helmets at the time, the MREs, the belts and the vests that you see today. It's all been developed out there,
Hmm.
and so we got a tour of that facility as well.
That's cool. What a fun part of the job, though. I mean, to be able to.
It
I
was
mean,
fun. I mean, you're dealing with the professionals that are really doing this for a living, and here we are, just a couple of toy people roaming around, and for us, we're just trying to pick up on the latest cues and seeing what might be coming down the road, so that it can be in GI Joe. But
hmm.
some of the people, they didn't want to talk to us. Others would just kind of relax and say, "Oh, toys. Yeah, I know GI Joe. Let me show you what we're doing over here. Maybe you can make a toy out of it, that kind of thing."
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things that makes GI Joe's unique is the attention to detail, which you and I have talked about offline. But you know, it's in the real world aspect for many vehicles. Especially those early years, and I think that's what's so popular. Some of that earlier stuff is, you know, there's a real sense, that this can actually exist because some of it does exist in the real world. So, what a
If it,
fun
it
job
was
to
a
have.
question of putting stuff on there that, if it looked believable, well, maybe it is.
Hmm.
So we
Hmm.
tried to make it look like that this could exist in the real world.
Hmm. And that's what makes GI Joe unique. And even if it isn't, I mean, as time went on, Cobra especially more fantasy, right? And but
Yeah.
some great concepts though. That's the thing.
Well, I
That's what I
know
love
I sent you a picture of the Polish stealth tank,
about.
and I said, "Does art imitate life, or life imitate art?" Too bad the Poles were 20 years behind
Hmm.
the Mauler,
Yeah, yeah. Which
because there's a lot of similarity in the look.
yeah, and I mean, as far as the Mauler, speaking of the Mauler, um, what was how was it? How did that come to be like motorized? And were you excited? Like, did you decide that, or was that like, hey, we have a little bit of a bigger budget, we can make motorized vehicle again, like the Mobat?
Well, that was just me wanting something that looked more modern than the Mobat. To me, that the Mobat looked like something from the 1950s,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought that the tank should look a little more futuristic.
Mm-hmm.
And after looking and again through the publications and whatnot, seeing what was happening, um, because at that time, the Abrams was just becoming on, as part of mainstream army.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they were doing a number of experiments with unmanned turrets on a tracked vehicle. And so I thought, well, this is probably a direction we should look into. Since the Mobat was motorized, I felt that the Mauler needed to be motorized as well. But one of the drawbacks was mechanically with the Mauler, when you wanted to turn the tank, it would lose power in one track because of the mechanical action. So
Mm-hmm.
I had uh, come up with what's called a planetary gear type design, where no power was lost, so the tank could turn smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
And Irv Dudley refined that to the point that he and I shared a patent for its design for the Mauler tank.
That's awesome. And there's another connection to the Mauler, the character himself.
Of
You know,
course, best
uh,
looking GI Joe character ever made.
that is true. How did that come to be? Like, is that something Ron came to you? Did you go to Ron? And talk a little bit about just that whole process of
That was to me a complete surprise. That was Ron
That's
Rudat's doing. He did it without my knowledge, and plus at that time, I was senior designer, but not design director. So
yeah,
I'm just going about doing, nose to the grindstone, doing what I was doing, and I guess Ron was having fun with it.
snapping some photos of you and making you a figure, right?
There you go.
So, which is fun, and I'll show the sculpture sheet for that, when I put this up. So, um, now, was there a specific type of vehicle that you enjoyed more than others? Whether it be Joe vehicle, Cobra, traditional military, a ninja, dreadnoughts. Is there anything specific that kind of sticks out to you as far as a favorite?
Like I said, it's hard to pick a favorite, but
Yeah.
it kind of depended on what it was you were working on. I mean, one of the nice I enjoyed working, for example, on the APC, the carry case,
Mm-hmm.
because the challenge came down to, well, we need a carry case for GI Joe figures. And I thought, well, I just don't want to make a box or something that you put them in. I wanted to do something. So I thought, well, what about a troop carrier? And here's a case in point where after the initial presentation, um, well, I think it was Steve Schwartz in marketing, head of marketing at the time, said, "Can you put a handle on it? You kids need to carry it." And of course, I said, "Well, sure." So that's where the bumper could pull out, and it became a carry handle for the whole thing. And I guess ultimately the thing could hold like what, 28 figures, something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So
And then another
you're the guy
one,
who just said, "Sure, I can do anything you want me to do. Just tell me." Right?
yeah, we can make it work. But it wasn't an idea thought of at the time, that it had to have a handle or it had to be carried. I just was more in tune of thinking, how can I incorporate this with the other GI Joe vehicles? And it just so happened to carry a whole bunch of figures.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I think I teased you a little bit about, was there ever a tow hook? Because what a great vehicle that would have had a tow hook.
yeah,
You know, to tow the Howl, or some of the Whirlwind, or some of those vehicles, behind it.
right. One of
So,
the other vehicles that believe it or not, that I enjoyed doing was the Cobra Imp.
which
Uh,
one?
Pardon me?
Which one is it?
The Cobra Imp.
Oh, Imp. Okay, I thought you said him. I was like, what?
No, no. That was the one that was actually motorized at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And it got cost reduced down to being a static thing. But the fact that it had the missiles that could explode open and drop all these mines, which of course became vacuum cleaner food.
Yeah, yeah,
But that was a fun one to do because of the
yeah,
look. Yeah, you can change things up with Cobra because they're a little more exotic.
yeah. And was that costed out? I believe the mechanical part of it, being
That's what I
motorized.
say. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
We had to make it fit a price point, and at that time, I guess it was on the lower medium side price point that we thought that this would be the best vehicle to put in there for that.
yeah, yeah. I have a model of it, which is cool. I mean, it's not the I've seen the motorized version. I know that's still, I believe, in our archives at Hasbro, so that's kind of neat. And then we had that at HasCon and showed that. And
Right.
then I've been fortunate enough to pick up a model of the um, just a styrene model of the imp itself, like in its almost true form. I think there's a couple minor things that are different on it, but
Mhm.
pretty neat. Um, so when working on the different figures and vehicles, we touched upon this a little bit earlier, but if we want to expand upon it, we can. There's several that wouldn't have been that weren't taking a final product. Can you discuss anything that you really, out of the things that you worked on and that you designed, that didn't come to fruition that you really wish they had, out of the unproduced stuff that maybe you put together?
Let's see. The train.
Mm-hmm.
That would, to me, opened up a whole new category. I understand the reasons why not, but didn't mean I was happy about it because I thought this was one of those expandable things. You can always add a new car every year that did something.
True.
It just was a whole different theme that you could, like the aircraft carrier, build around and
Mm-hmm.
incorporate Cobra attacking or the Joes defending or doing what they're doing with it. And so it just I felt was not the right decision at that time.
And originally, I think, wasn't it supposed to be going around like the Cobra Island place that got canceled?
Yes, that was one way to pitch it, uh,
Okay.
to say that it gave a reason for existence for Cobra Island and for the train, but
Mm-hmm.
the powers that be decided otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. Which, I mean, the model's out there and it's featured in a book, so at least it's been seen and been shown, and I know somebody's made a replica of it and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I've recently at the last Dallas show, somebody really did a pretty nice job 3D printing
hmm
a version of the train.
so
And I went there. I knew that this was going to be there, and I went to the show preparing myself to hate this thing. But it turns out that's not the case. I mean, I was really impressed, and I liked the guy that did it, and
hmm
helped him. I don't want to say helped. Pointed out a couple things that he could look into to really help it along, and it was a nice experience.
that's cool. And hey, we're all open to criticism, right? Or critique.
That's right.
So, so as with any organization, change is inevitable. What were some of the major changes that you experienced over your tenure at Hasbro, and how did these changes impact you or anything you're working on?
Well, sometimes we would get a change in our marketing person, and they would have their own opinion of things. So um, that could affect what it is you're working on.
Hmm.
Um, that was an instance with the um, Tomahawk helicopter, for example, and it ultimately got kicked up to senior level for a decision to be made as to whether or not it should also be a medevac type helicopter,
Hmm.
and I was I was against it, and the marketer was for it. But ultimately, it was decided that's not the way we should go, which, of course, in my opinion, was the right way.
And again, another great fun vehicle,
Yeah,
and popular amongst collectors as well. And I mean, that's something, I got Noah to play with, and it's just it's a great vehicle to have the open sides and put the characters in there, and so and all that, and the blades. I think the blades on that can break, if they're put in. It's hard to get them out, but as collectors, we figured it out, and just have to be careful with
Right.
getting in and out.
Right.
So, um,
One of the things that, for example, the original concept for the Cobra Maggot, it was originally a complete Cobra vehicle. It just had, an articulated vehicle so that it could go over any terrain. That was the idea, kind of like the Gamma Goat the U.S. Army had at the time. But when in presentation, Steve Schwartz once again said, "Well, can it break apart so that each vehicle can go off and do its own thing?" And that's when I said, "Why, sure." So that we just made it so that you had the tow vehicle could act as a tank, you had the howitzer, and then the control station that you could have figures interact with in the base vehicle.
and again, I love like when you first shared that story. It gave some more life to that vehicle because it's like just knowing the history behind it and like where your inspiration came from just made it even cooler of a vehicle to me personally. And I know the original colors. What were the original? Wasn't it black originally? Is
No,
I
the
think
original color was like a slate gray color, a
okay.
greenish slate gray with yellow. The black
Okay.
came about later. I think that became like a Night Force type
Yeah,
vehicle.
that's right. That's right. Who decided on changing it to blue though? The original concept.
Um, I honestly can't recall that. I don't know whether I illustrated it that way and we just picked the color for it.
Gotcha. Because
But
I know the presentation art's that slate gray like ish. So
that was me. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I
But
don't know. It's interesting. And you helped with I think you helped with the figure design of the character that came with him, or
yeah,
with
I
it.
did that too. Yeah.
That's all right. That's right.
Yeah. I find that designers or the creative types can either create things or there are designers that are really good at doing people.
Hmm.
And I'm more of a thing person. People like Kurt Groen and Mark Pennington and the Bart Sears, they're definitely people. They can illustrate
People.
people. Yeah, I can't do that. But that was one of the few characters that I did do.
That's awesome. And
And that's because I was watching some of these illustrators like the Ron Rudat and Mark Penningtons and what they do.
worms, which everybody loves the little antenna that you included that gets lost, and it's probably one of the hardest accessories to find, and it's very costly to them. So thank you for creating a very small piece.
My pleasure.
Um, with
In essence, with the Maggot, and opened up another category for GI Joe, like the Mean Dog, for example, that also could come apart and form multiple vehicles, or the Condor is another one, also Frank Coronius design.
mhm,
So that that kind of opened the door for that type of play.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, and Frank's, I think a lot of his vehicles were like that. So, um, with the two and one, I guess you could say, right? That whole
2 or
concept.
3 in 1, yeah. Hmm.
3-1, and it helped, I'm sure, with marketing the parents too. You're getting bigger bang for your buck, right? So,
Right, exactly.
for you, what separates GI Joe from all the other toy lines that you worked on?
Oh my goodness. The fact that you could pretty much do anything. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of responsibility because GI Joe was a big money earner for Hasbro, so that had to you had to be true to the brand, but yet you could also do some of the off the wall things like um, the Space Force or the Ninja Guys, and you could experiment with color change and do things that maybe you wouldn't be able to do in any other product line.
Mm-hmm. Because I mean, Joe was the premier brand. From what I understood back then, that was the brand everybody wanted to work on. Like you wanted to get on GI Joe to be on that brand and work on it. So
This
from what
is,
I've
yeah, there was always folks that, would want to try and submit ideas or say how they like to be on the team and all of that. A lot of that did go on.
gathered. Um, as a designer, it's of course important to have a range of influences and inspirations. Where did you draw your inspiration from, and who's been your biggest influences throughout your career?
First of all, I think a designer is very observant. They see or they listen and hear what's going on in the world, especially if they're on a particular brand and it's relevant to what they're doing. You try and um, pick up on catchphrases and just see what's happening trend wise in design. And I just would try and do that and expand on it a little bit and incorporate it into the Joe world. As far as an influence for me, um, was one of when I first got to Hasbro and I was assigned to do Tente. The person who I interacted with every day was a man by the name of Amnon Inbar, and Amnon was was an Israeli citizen who came to the United States. Very smart man, and he would challenge you every day, and he would really try and get you to expand your thinking and push the envelope a bit. So I would have to say he was the one that kind of made it so that you could think broadly. Engineers, in my mind, are trained to look this way to try and solve a problem. A designer looks this way and
Point.
try and look at it all, sift through all that information, and then pick out what they think will work best, the best approach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Amnon would be the type to have you look this way. If you think you're going down this narrow path, he would push you to look over here or look over there and then try and incorporate that.
What was his
And
background in?
he was an industrial designer. He came from a field, I believe, that did medical equipment.
Okay. Huh.
And yeah, he had immigrated to this country and was setting up a new career. Ultimately, he went to Johnson and Johnson, and that was during the time when Johnson and Johnson was establishing their own baby toy line. So there was a lot of research and science that went into the design of their products geared for infants and slightly older children.
Mm-hmm.
So he became head of that division.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Last question. What influenced you from Hasbro that you've taken away and still incorporate into your daily life?
Well, that was a couple lifetimes ago. um, I think the it's hard for me to say. I'll
Yeah.
be honest. Um, but I think the fact that, as I talked about with the design discipline, what I am doing today, and the skills in fabricating and making something were really crafted during that time at Hasbro, and allowed me to do that. In fact, the company really hated me for what I was doing because I was one of those design directors that would cut plastic and glue stuff in my office, where they gave you this beautiful desk to work on. And my desk was all, it had paint spilled on it, and it was all niched and notched because of the cuts from the knives and all that. That I kind of like ruined their desk, and they were not happy about that. But I couldn't stop. Not I couldn't just not do things, because my point of view was to lead by example. I wanted to show the new people that the old guy could still do it, and I still had fun doing it, and I wanted to keep doing it.
Mhm.
So,
And that's one
and
of the
I think
challenges,
that
right?
still carries through to this day, doing what I'm doing now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges when you get into management. from what I've understood, especially in your industry, it's like, you're taken away from that design aspect. You're not working with your hands maybe as much. Like you said, you're kind of playing the ringmaster, that you don't get to do what you really enjoyed doing too. So I know some people shared that, they really never had any desire to be in management because they didn't want to lose that aspect of what they did.
Right. When you get onto that side, I mean, it's more about numbers
Yeah.
and schedules and okay, what's my next milestone that I have to hit, that kind of thing. But you still want to keep your hands in it.
Yeah. Which you did. I think you were successful in doing. I mean, a lot of the vehicles, I mean, I mean, I think I never counted like, hey, how many did Dave do, or how many did Frank do, and how many did Guy do? I mean, you have a lot. Like, there's some doing the books. There's like, oh, you did this. Oh, you did that. Like, I didn't even know, that you had
Yeah.
worked on some of those. So I think you had your hands in a lot of it still, even at your level. Even when you moved up. So, no, that's awesome, and I appreciate you coming on and sharing, a little bit about your time on Joe and Hasbro. And like I mentioned to you prior, hopefully I can have you on again, and we'll talk about some other toy lines like Cops, like maybe go a little bit further and bring up Bart Sears on, and some other people.
That would be cool. I'd like to do that.
Because who's the product manager for that? Do you remember?
That was Kirk Bazigian.
Was it Kirk? Okay.
Yeah, Kirk was a
We know
god.
that guy. We can bring him on.
Sure, why not?
But that'd be, I think it'd be a lot of fun. So, but I appreciate you coming on, taking time. I know it's late back there, but thank you again.
Yeah, looking forward to the Joe show in Dallas again this year.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, it should be a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of new people coming in addition to who was there last year. So they're
Yeah, I'm
really
looking
building it
forward
up.
to seeing Guy Cassidy.
Yeah, yeah. I saw him this past summer when I was up there, and that's the thing. It's hard that you guys aren't all in the same place. So I'm glad we're able to kind of work together and do something fun. And we'll be setting up some calls here shortly. I'm going to get everybody together probably in the next couple weeks and start talking about ideas for panels and what are your guys' thoughts. I have some ideas, but I want to build, again, collaboration, right? So really
There you
build from you guys on what you want to do. So
go. All right.
appreciate it again. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Dan.